Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Welcome, I'm Joe Barnhart.
And I am Ellen Greenwood.
And we want you to know, if you don't believe in a God, you're not alone. In fact, if you do believe, you shouldn't be alone. And if you aren't decided, you shouldn't be alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free thinkers, a free thought of atheists and agnostics. This is a show for people who want to rationally discuss issues, including the issues of supernatural beliefs. It's a call-in show, so feel free to call in and let's have an open, rational, pleasant discussion and learn from each other if you have time. We invite you to also send in email communication, and you can see on the screen the phone numbers and so forth. freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. Ellen?
And you can also tweet to @FFTVKnox.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah. The Rationalist of East Tennessee monthly activities on the first and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussion. The second Sunday is a book club. The fourth Sunday is the Reflections Gathering, which is a potluck afternoon gathering at a member's home.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to do some in the news very briefly, and the discussion today is going to be, where did religion come from, and basically, what is religion? And we hope we can have a good, serious, and open discussion on that. In the news, the Knox County Commissioners met to adopt an official policy of public prayer before their meetings. Several people met to want more prayer, and some wanted a time of silence. One of our co-hosts, Larry Rhodes, suggested that that was a matter not for state matters. It's a church matter and a private matter, but not. The First Amendment, he says, of the Constitution, our Constitution of the United States, which you are sworn to uphold, he told the commissioners, forbids the making of any laws which represent an establishment of religion. Therefore, he said, you should be aware that you are about to vote an unconstitutional action. As a matter of fact, this kind of constitutional action of the First Amendment, separate church-state, came about partly because in Boston they hanged some Baptists because some fellow Christians who were Puritans thought they had the wrong religion. And Thomas Jefferson years later learned about this, and other Baptists then who were very strong church-state separation, and that's why it's in our Constitution.
Interesting.
If what our commissioners here want, it will be challenged, and it will be pretty costly, it seems to me, to take this through the courts. A lot of money. And the commissioner, Mike Brown, said if people find the prayer offensive, they can leave the chambers or wait until the prayer is over before coming into the meetings. But this makes people who don't believe in their particular religion stand in the hallways while they practice their religion. That seems a discrimination, and taxpayers don't pay money to have their religion and their views discriminated against like that. It's not a church service. It's time to do a state business.
Well, you know, the current policy states the commission doesn't express a preference for any one faith or denomination. However, one of the commissioners, the only woman on the board, Amy Broyles, spoke up to mention that in the past there's been precious little diversity of religious expression from the commission in the prayers they hosted. She said, "It's very important to me that everyone who comes here before us with their business feels that they are welcome and part of the community. And I don't think that we are giving that currently with the way we have been doing things." And we free thinkers would further say that there has never been a sanctioned expression of non-religious thought at these meetings either. When the ballots were cast, Ms. Broyles was the only opposing vote, and the measure carried 10-1.
Well, that's unfortunate because it's not a vote for religion, it seems to me. It's a vote for using a particular religion and a particular version over against other people's. And I think that's why we have churches and synagogues and mosques and other groups.
Right.
We don't need, the last thing we need is politicians telling us how to pray or not to pray or when to pray. And all that. Let's let them do their jobs. That's why the tax money pays them for.
And we have no doubt that because of the actions taken there yesterday, the county will be embroiled in costly litigation for some time to come. Way to go, commissioners. All the time and money you've wasted on this issue to date, resources which should have been used on much more important matters, is nothing to compare to what it's going to cost us in the future.
It's just a shame they had to get into that. Unfortunately, some people in religion seem to be much more interested in political power. We fought the old battle of theocracy, of some people's version of God running the government. And of course, they're the ones interpreting God, you see.
Right.
So it's their, and of course the Catholics and Protestants went to war over this in Europe, which is why our Baptists over here, Roger Williams, said, let's have church-state separation.
Right.
And Jefferson and others followed through with that.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people over here understood how important this was.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, let's get on to our discussion.
Okay. All right.
What is religion, and this is our opinion.
And where did it come from?
Where did it come from? And the religion's a big, big thing around the world. You've got major religion, the missionary religions around the world. Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam are missionary religion. They're out trying to convert people. And then traditionally, Islam and Christianity did it with force. That's why in our country they developed the church-state separation principle, is to eliminate this. If you can't convince people, then it's not real faith in the first place. It's just saying, yeah, I believe, in order not to get shot or hanged.
Right.
And that's not religion, it seems to me. It has nothing to do with religion at all. It's just trying to save your neck. So, where did religion come from? Well, we know if you read the ancient Greeks and the Romans, they truly believed, many of them, that the stars or the planets were gods. And that Mercury, one of the planets, was the messenger of the gods. And of course, Mars was the god of war, and you had Jupiter, and Neptune is the god of the sea. We know that Pluto was the god of the underworld, and Pluto's been demoted recently by the astronomers.
Well, now only as a planet.
Only as a planet.
Only as a planet. Yeah.
But this is a kind of anthropomorphism. That is, it's projecting onto.
Big word.
Yeah, it's what it is. The word anthropomorphism is just a Greek word that literally means man or human beings. And so anthropology, you see, is a study of human beings and their culture and their artifacts and what they make. And anthropomorphism is the practice of projecting onto the natural world our own feelings and our own personalities. In fact, the word spirit, in the Greek, it's the same word for wind. So that, because imagine yourself alone in the dark and you hear the wind howling, and they start personifying or turning it into a person-like being. And in the Hebrew, the Greek is pneuma, from which we get our word pneumonia, because the breath coming up and the wind. And then the Hebrew is ruach, and that means wind or breath and spirit. Same word. And what I think here is a possibility is that this is another example of anthropomorphism, projecting onto the natural world our own personalities.
Right.
And filling the world with demons and angels. The word angel, angelos, and the Greek just means messenger. And then, of course, they become, you have gods running around, and among the Greeks you had all kinds of gods. And then they did so much, they had to have messengers.
Right.
And so the Mercury was one of them. Then you had other Angelos, and then Christianity, which was in the Greek world, and the New Testament was written in Greek, borrowed heavily from the Greek world, and came up with lots of angels.
Right, with wings and halos.
Well, that later developed, I think, just kept perpetuating itself, and making them, since if they could travel like that, then presumably like birds, you see, they had to have wings. And then you had in the Old Testament, you have thunder in Mount Sinai, and that's like the voice of God, and earthquakes, and that's more anthropomorphism, you see, projecting onto the natural world our own.
Reminds you of Zeus and Thor.
Zeus and Thor, among the Greek gods.
Well, actually, Thor was Scandinavian.
Scandinavian, right.
Yeah, but they all seem to have a lot of similarities.
Thor's Day.
Right.
And then among the American natives, they would make animals person-like, and maybe believe they could communicate with a coyote in the way that you'd communicate with a person. Now, we all know you can communicate with a dog up to a point, but we don't invite dogs into this conversation because there are limitations.
Right.
But some of the American natives thought that they got communication from animal spirits, and sometimes they would believe a mountain would be like a god, and that's another example, it seemed to me, of anthropomorphism. And so it's a very ancient practice.
Yeah.
And then you can see this in the Hebrew tradition. Well, you got a passage there, I think, in Exodus.
Well, yeah. Here's one. This is Exodus 4:23-24. And this particular quote I have here is from the King James Version. And I say unto thee, let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou wilt refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn.
Yeah. Who's talking here is supposed to be Yahweh, God.
So who's the son?
That's supposed to be Israel.
Oh, okay.
You can see the anthropomorphism. And he's going to kill. If you don't take care of Israel, I'll kill you, is what he's saying. And then in the story, I don't know whether you have the rest of the quote there or not.
Well, the next verse goes on, and it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him and sought to kill him.
It sought to kill him. Now, in the rest of the story, it's a very ancient story. The wife of Moses, this is Moses, thinks that he's going to be killed by this God Yahweh. And so she figures out, well, what this God needs is a sacrifice. So she cuts the foreskin off of their newborn boy and throws it out there as a sacrifice to this God. Now, all of these Greeks and Romans at that time apparently believed that there were these gods and demons and so forth, and you've got to deal with them.
Right.
If they're out there, you got to barter.
Yeah.
Now, I always enjoyed this story because if you're going to sacrifice to a god, you don't say, I'll give you a kidney. That's too much. So if you're smart, how about a cow? Or a goat? Or this woman said, how about foreskin, and if anything a male can part with without dying, it's foreskin. So, but I thought that's a and it says in that story, she did the job with a flint, which is the Stone Age, which suggests that's a very, very primitive story. Now, and the point I think we're trying to get at is this is highly anthropomorphic. It's saying, well, if you got somebody who's causing you a hard time, maybe you can negotiate with him and give him something less than being killed.
Right.
And of course,
try to satisfy him.
Yeah. And of course, in the story of Noah, after he got through killing virtually this God Yahweh killing most of the human race, Noah, as soon as he gets off, offers a sacrifice, and it says in the Bible, this God Yahweh liked the sweet smell of the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that's how, you know, you don't think of a God then, does he have nostrils? Well, you don't know what they thought in that time. We have different versions, you know, that have developed. But in those days you have, for example, God walking in the garden in the cool of the evening. Now that's high, and he asks Adam, "Where are you?" Because he's hiding. But you know, if they had an omnipotent God, he'd already know the answer to that, unless he's just pretending not to. So the point is, highly anthropomorphic. Well, what other passages you got there that might throw some light on this?
Well, let's see. Now, you've already talked about Noah some.
And there's go ahead.
Well, there was one here from 1 Samuel 12. And it starts out, "But when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, was moving against you, you said to me, 'No, we want a king to rule over us, even though the Lord your God was your king. Now here is the king you have chosen, the one you asked for. See, the Lord has set a king over you. Now then, stand still and see this great thing the Lord is about to do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest now? I will call on the Lord to send thunder and rain, and you will realize what an evil thing you did in the eyes of the Lord when you asked for a king.' Then Samuel called on the Lord, and that same day the Lord sent thunder and rain, and all the people stood in awe of the Lord and of Samuel."
And of Samuel. Now that's
of Samuel,
this is Samuel's story. And what's going on here is, in the background is politics. Is that Samuel is the man in charge. He's the priest. He's a prophet, and he's virtually the head man in the military. And I mean, he's, you know, he's sort of the general of the generals. And now the people want a king. And then Samuel is saying, God doesn't want you to have a king. But this is Samuel's interpretation. And so now he's interpreting the thunder as being God's disapproval, you see. And later on in this story, we're going to have Samuel saying, I'm going to bat for you people anyhow. And I'm going to be compassionate, and I'm going to ask God to be compassionate. And he's going to ease off on the thunder and the storms. And so, but you can see here is an anthropomorphic view of God, and then the prophet serving as the mediator. Let's see, we've got a call in. Let's see. Have we got a call in? Hey, give us a name, would you?
Bob?
Bob, go ahead, Bob.
From time to time I turn this channel on, and most of the time I turn it off, but I just want to thank you today for reading God's Word and for being on the subject that you've been on and explaining some different things to people who might not understand things. As far as I was concerned, atheists were always totally against any reading of the Word or any understanding of the Bible, but you have enlightened me, and I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, you know, the ancient literature, we have to, you brought up a real good point. Ancient literature is written by people trying to think and work through their problems at their time, and that's all what we're trying to do. I mean, we're just human beings doing the best we can.
True.
And
are you familiar with what they call the VAT gene, the God gene? I guess some people are calling that.
Oh yeah. That just came out. Yeah.
It's just very interesting how, you know, science is trying to explain religion, religion's trying to explain science one way or another. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing your beliefs that you are today, and for going back into those ancient scriptures, and for enlightening us. I sure do appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much.
I'd like to ask a question, Bob.
Sure.
How did you find us?
I always watch this it's a local community station. And I have from time to time called in in the past, get some answers to some questions.
And so you are a local resident then?
Yes, I am.
Okay, very good.
Well,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I grew up in Knoxville. In fact, I'm so old, I went to the old Knoxville High School.
Oh, my.
Not many of those left.
No, not many.
But we sometimes look down on people in the past because they don't think the way we do. But think about people looking at us 150 years.
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
And I admire these people in the past who are trying to work through their problems. That's why I taught ancient philosophy. And the Greeks were trying to wrestle with these problems. And the early Hebrew, my Hebrew teachers, and they were, you could see them trying to think. And even, in my opinion, when they had visions, it's still their way of trying to think.
Right.
And
right.
So that's why I'm a humanist. I'm a fellow human being, appreciating these people struggling and working the way we are. Well, let's go on, and we got any more passages there? Oh, what I wanted to point out in this passage, here Samuel is in a position basically of power and influence.
Right.
And the people want David as king. Well, Samuel, who now thinks he is the major interpreter of God, says God doesn't want you to have a king. But you get the feeling in reading, what I like about the Bible, it leaves the Nixon tapes in there. And you get the sense it's Samuel who really doesn't want a king.
Yeah.
And since he's doing all the interpreting, he just says it's God who doesn't want it. But David has a different viewpoint. And the people have a different viewpoint, and so they get a King David. So the Bible, when you see the Bible, it's more like an antiphonal choir. When I was in a Baptist church, they had antiphonal music.
Right.
You'll have someone singing, or a group over here, then another group will be answering, and they go back and if you read the Bible, it's not just the Bible says this one thing. You've got different voices, you see. And like you read the book of Job, and the book of Job is challenging the book of Proverbs. Saying, there's a lot in the book of Proverbs that needs to be rethought. Which it's not finished.
Right.
And so he has a whole dramatic story of God having a conversation with one of the sons of God, which turns out to be later, and it just up there called the adversary. Now, centuries later, they called it the devil, but not at that time when it was written.
Yeah. Well, Joe, our caller here brought up really what is a very interesting question to me, maybe more so even than where religion came from, which is, what is religion, and can those of us who are atheists and humanists, agnostics, are we religious?
Okay.
Or does religion have to include a God?
What is interesting is Karl Barth, a famous Swiss theologian, did not like the word religion, and his view of religion is very much like the atheist view of religion. I mean, it's a very negative thing. Now, it's interesting, Jimmy Carter is one of my favorite persons.
Mine too, yes.
But he was a very loyal Southern Baptist of the cooperative Southern Baptist version, not the fundamentalist version. And a fundamentalist Baptist accused him of being a secular humanist in his ethics. And so, and in a sense was saying that Jimmy Carter was not very religious, whereas others, and Jerry Falwell, who called himself a conservative, but is to the right of Attila the Hun, didn't like Jimmy Carter because he thought he was too liberal, which among Baptists, Jimmy Carter is solidly conservative. You see. Now, my point is, religion gets to be a very, very broad word. And what some people call religion, other people denounce and hate. The word religion apparently comes from a Latin word, which means bond or attachment, and maybe even commitment. If you're bonded, you're committed. And
loyal.
fealty.
Yeah.
So you got loyalty, And commitment, that's faithfulness.
Right.
There. So now the question is, everybody has got commitments.
Yeah.
The question is, to what and to whom, you see. You've been married several years, not nearly as many years as I have. And my wife and I have been married 58 years now. I thought it was 56. She said, no, it's 58. It seems like 58 to her. Seems like just a few to me.
You better get it right.
But this is commitment.
Right.
And we all are committed. And I think that what the root of the religion, everybody in that sense has some religion in the sense of commitment or devotion. You can't have a society without it.
Right.
And some cultures then had a totem to represent their tribe. We have flags. And then that's why in the Hebrew, thou shalt have no other gods before me. That in many ways is their totem, their flag. And of course, if you're going to be an Israelite, that's the only one.
Yes.
But they realize there are other gods. No other gods before me presupposes there are other gods, you see. So now the question of whether or not you can be religious without a God, in that sense of the word, of course, people have all kinds of commitments. And I mean, the Muslims, and traditionally used to refer to people who weren't Muslims as infidels, unbelievers.
Yeah.
Well, that's called ethnocentrism. That just our group has it, and the rest of them are outcasts. But America is a country in which people can have various commitments, and they don't always agree with each other.
Yeah.
Well, so you had something else you wanted to get on to.
Oh, okay. Here's a good, this came in as a tweet. It's very good. Is atheism not wanting God to exist, or is it God doesn't exist?
That's a good question. I guess you'd have to really, to be fair, you'd have to ask a particular atheists.
Right.
But traditionally, the word atheism is asking the question, is there a God? Not whether you wish there were or you wish there were not. You see, this is not a matter of wish fulfillment.
I would think that many of us who are atheist, humanist, sometime believers, or would find it much easier to just say, "Oh, there's a God. Let's let God take charge of everything." It's not easy to be a non-believer.
There is a view of God by a philosopher, Charles Hartshorne, mathematician Alfred North Whitehead. To me, makes a lot of sense. Now, it's nothing like the right-wingers, nothing. But this is the view of Spinoza and Einstein, and their view is that nature is like the body of God, the embodiment, the incarnation of God. All of nature sings and round me rings the wonders of of His grace in that sense. But it's not supernaturalism. You see, nature then is the divine revelation. If you want to understand God, study nature, and that's what scientists do. So from that point of view, some of the most religious people on earth would be scientists.
Right. So, yeah.
So we could spend a whole program on different versions of what it means to hold to a God.
Yeah.
Some of them are absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the stories from the Scripture that you suggested that I look at, I found particularly interesting. And this was the one about Saul and what I'd always called the Witch of Endor. We always like witch stories, but in this translation, she's called the Medium at Endor. Medium. Yeah. Can we look at that story a minute?
Yeah. In fact, in one translation calls it a, what do you call it's a spirit mother, a ghost mother. That's the translation.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you'll remind me, I'll try to show where that came into.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. This is the New International Version. 1 Samuel 28:3 through 25. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums and spiritists from the land. The Philistines assembled and came and set up camp at Shunem, while Saul gathered all Israel and set up camp at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid. Terror filled his heart. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him, not by dreams or Urim or prophets. Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I may go and inquire of her."
A medium,
Yeah. So they said, "Well, there is one in Endor." So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. "Consult a spirit for me," he said, "and bring up for me the one I name." But the woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why have you set a trap for me, for my life, to bring about my death?" And Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this." And then the woman asked, "Well, whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," he said.
Bring up Samuel.
When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." And the king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" And the woman said, "I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth."
Let me interrupt you right here.
That's about it, I think.
I see a ghostly figure. Now, this is a very ancient story. Now, in the Hebrew, which surprised me, that the translation is probably not as accurate as it ought to be. The Hebrew word, as I read it, is Elohim, and that's the very same word that says, "In the beginning, Elohim created." And now, to be fair, the word Elohim has a long history to it. El, see, is one of the ancient gods, Elohim. I am at the M, at the ending. Im is plural. So this could be translated, "I see God," Elohim. That's powerful stuff. Or it could be translated, "I see gods." Now, what I'm suggesting is this may be one of the origins of religion, is people believed in ghosts and spirits coming back from the dead, and these were their gods. And where is it that people often see people coming back from the dead, even though nobody else sees them? It's in their dreams. And they talk to them. In fact, the other day, I had a dream. I saw someone who's not alive anymore, and I talked. I
frequently do that.
In fact, one of my dreams recently, I was singing a duet with my wife. My wife sings beautifully. In this dream, I was singing gloriously. Unfortunately, that's just a dream. So what I'm suggesting, some of the dreams, they took to be real people, real gods.
Now, I guess the most famous story I can think of in the Old Testament of a dream is Jacob and the ladder going up into heaven. I can still see the picture in my little Bible as a child, of Jacob with the ladder going up into heaven.
Yeah, Charles Fuller, the old evangelist on radio, and a soft-spoken evangelist, not that Jerry Falwell type. Had this theme song, "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder." You remember?
Oh, yeah. It's a very nice folk song.
Yeah, nice people. Climbing Jacob's Ladder. That was a vision that he had. Also, he had another dream, which turned out to be a nightmare. Do you remember Jacob's other?
Yeah, in fact, I've got that down here. Yeah. This I found in Genesis 32:24 through 30. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.
Now, is this figurative language? Or did Jacob think he was struggling with some supernatural being, or was this a dream? Well, what I'm suggesting is a lot of times, even in the New Testament, you have people who have dreams, but they think they're divine visitations.
Right.
Now, my question is, how do you distinguish, is an angel came to me in a dream, how do you distinguish that from saying, I dreamed that an angel came to me? What's the difference? Now, I don't see the difference.
Huge difference in meaning.
Yeah, the meaning is different.
Yeah.
But I think it's the same. And in fact, in the book of Acts, you have Saul, it's 16th chapter of Acts. Paul, having a dream of someone calling him over to Macedonia.
Right.
And he apparently takes it to be a real person in his dream. But it says it's a dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
And have you got another passage there in the book of Acts? I can't.
Well, let's see.
It's the one in the 10th chapter of Acts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I do have that somewhere. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, this is an interesting one. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day, at about 3 in the afternoon, he had a vision.
A vision,
He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. The angel answered, Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had gone, Cornelius called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier who was one of his attendants. He told them everything that had happened and sent them to Joppa.
Okay. Now, what's interesting in this story, here you have a dream, and then the follow story is Peter having this dream.
Oh, yes, Peter has another dream.
Yeah, let me just tell it to you, because I can make it shorter.
All right. Be better anyway.
I don't know if it'll be better than what the text.
The Joe Barnhart version.
Well, the book of Acts writer, whoever he was or she was, we don't really know. It says Luke. I mean, it doesn't say who wrote it. It was the tradition said, but we really don't know who wrote it. But it says in this that Peter's up on the rooftop, this tanner's house with a lot of animals, you know, and it's mealtime, and then that's what he's waiting on. And he apparently falls asleep, and he has this vision of all this food coming down on a cloth, and you can imagine it's a tablecloth with all kinds of food on it, and it's food that a Jew shouldn't be eating. But then he hears a voice, and he says, in effect, this is good food, take and eat. And it's interpreted, Peter interprets it to be the voice of Christ, and he eats. Now, I think, here's an example of problem solving. This same Peter in the book of Galatians is having a real battle with Paul the Apostle. Paul the Apostle says you can eat with Gentiles and eat their food. Peter says, no, pull away from it, because just eat Hebrew food. Yeah. In this dream, it's Peter agreeing with Paul. And you could say this is a dream that reflects his thinking about what Paul is doing, saying, okay, if you're going to have religion going out to the Gentiles, you can't just make them all Jews. Right. With this kind of dietary rules and regulations, we've got to get over that. Yeah. And so there's trying. In other words, you got a theory, and then you say, no, we got problems. You expand the theory, same as you do in science. You expand your theory. This is what Einstein did with Newton. You expand it. And then you run into problems. If you expand your theory in religion, you run into problems, and then you got to revise.
Yeah.
And I think this is what this stream is about.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's an example of anthropomorphism, and you can see it happening even in the dream world, because that's the way they thought at that time.
Yeah.
In other words, what I'm suggesting is, given their anthropomorphic way of looking at things, that's what they're stuck with, just as we're stuck with the way we look at things, and you've got to work with it within it.
Right.
And then after a while, you realize when you work in your system, it doesn't all work as well as you thought, and so you got to rework it. And if you read the Bible, you can see the reworking. That's why they keep adding on more books. You know, it doesn't just stop with the Pentateuch.
Right.
You've got Proverbs, and you've got and then you got the New Testament.
New Testament, yeah.
And the early Christians had a lot more literature. It's not in the Bible, but a heck of a lot more literature. Well, let's move on to some more of the topics. We've got the one. Okay. Oh, we got one in Exodus 33. Have you got it?
Yeah, we have a tweet here.
You can't just
wake up and say, I don't believe in God. You must hear about this God. Something must drive you to doubt.
Okay, if you read the history, see, thinking always includes doubt. I imagine even a cow has to have some doubts. And here's an example. Here's where the water is. You walk up there and it's not there. You got some doubts as to whether you want to keep staying there. You got to revise. It's the same as you go in traffic. You're not going anywhere. You can't stay there. You got to go somewhere else. It's all clogged up. So all thinking is trial and error, and you can see it in the Bible. You can see it in theology. I mean, you can study the history of the Christian atonement, and you can get different theories of the atonement. Because each theory is trying to solve a question or several questions and give an answer, and then it hits into problems. The same happens with Newton. Newton has some problems with gravitation. At least Einstein thought you need to expand this. And so you've got to have, and then Einstein had a theory of cosmology, and he thought the mathematical mistake had been made, and then he thought for a while it was a catastrophe. Then later something like, oh, he really had some insight. Well, it's struggle, and you can see it in theology. Revisions taking place in their theology. You got gods, and then you've got, well, if you got a lot of gods, then you got to interact, and they got jealousies, and so the Hebrews came up with just, after a while, it took them a long time, just one. And that's their unified field theory. And it's not surprising to me that a Jew, borrowing from another Jew named Spinoza, developed in physics the unified field theory. That's monotheism. With Spinoza, you got monism, and then you got Einstein borrowing heavily from Spinoza, it seems to me.
Yeah. I guess on a thinking of individuals and in relation to this question, I think for many people it's a matter of maturation of your beliefs. It's very easy to believe when you're a child, and sometimes the more you look at what you've been taught critically and in light of experience.
1 Corinthians 13, when I was a child, I spake as a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things, and we all try to do that now and then. There's that passage in Exodus 33 that's fascinating, and that's the passage in which Moses, it says, talked to God face to face as to a friend, remember?
Yes, it says, but he said, you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live.
Yeah, that's after it says they talked to him face to face. Then he says, you can't see my face.
Then the Lord said, Behold, there is a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock. And it will come about while my glory is passing by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by.
Okay.
Then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen.
And I remember as a kid saying, you can see God's back. Does God then have kidneys? Now, that's a kid thinking.
Yeah.
If God's got a back, he's got a belly. I mean, if you're going to take this literally.
Right.
And it did here. You've got to say this is be taken literally. In fact, Kenneth Copeland, who is a television evangelist from where I used to live in Texas, he says, if God could cover Moses' eyes so he couldn't see, he had to have a big hand. And so Kenneth Copeland figured out that God was 6 feet 2 or 3.
A pretty finite God, I would say there.
That's different from what some of the views you get in the Bible. But this is a particular view he got out of the Bible, you see. I mean, whether or not you go 6'2", I mean, Wilk the Stilt could look down on God in that respect.
Yeah.
But you can see how he did this with that anthropomorphic view, that God was literally could walk in the garden, and here he could pass by, and you could see his back. Now that's you mentioned the maturity of their views. Later on, the Hebrews would not say God had a back.
Right.
And you can't see his face. And even that got to be spiritualized. Now, God doesn't have 2 nostrils, they would say. And
right.
He doesn't have teeth and eardrums. All that would be. And then by the time you get to Hartshorne in the 20th century, the whole universe is God's body. You see, now that's borrowing from Spinoza and Einstein. And that's a major shift. And that's totally without supernaturalism. Okay, now we've got to go to make a program break, mid-break.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
So in case
you're the experienced one here, so you have to tell me about these things.
So in case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is founded jointly by them and by other individual contributors. We hope this is a lively show as well as a live show from 5 to 6. And then it's a call-in, and we did appreciate the previous call-in. And that's the kind we like. That's good rational discussion that makes a contribution too.
Right.
That was very useful to us. And you can see the feedback, Freethought Forum, and the call-in number. And don't wait. Just call whenever you feel like it, and help us out.
And if you're outside the Knoxville area, too, you can go to ctvknox.org, and you'll see the program streamed there, too. Okay,
and I think there's something you were going to put on the screen. I'm not sure. We'll get into that later on. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, called ASK, meets several times during the week. And they have meetups for food and a good time together, camaraderie, and agnostics, atheists, free thinkers, and other like-minded persons of East Tennessee can meet. And then there's also the Rationalists of East Tennessee. They have Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussion of subjects topical and timeless. A very interesting group of people too.
Yeah. Once a month they get together for a book club. You need not have read the book to attend, but of course it always helps. And both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee provide a social outlet so that if you do or do not believe in God or don't know, you're not alone. It's a time for people to come together and have good conversation with each other. And I'd like to think this is America where people can learn from each other and not kill each other. Learn from each other,
I mean,
Right.
what we have in common certainly is a lot of ignorance on my part and other people. I mean, when you think of how huge the universe is and how long history is, there's a lot we don't know. See,
That's
so
very true.
if you're a scientist, I don't think you're going to be out of work.
Right.
In terms of looking for knowledge.
Yes.
There's
yes.
plenty to learn from.
Yes, that's
Well,
true.
let's go on and see how further we can go with our discussion of what is religion. Often religion is said religion has to do with the transcendence. Okay, let's talk about that.
What do you mean by transcendent?
But the trouble with that question is very sensible. Okay, kind of nails you down, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
So like, when in doubt, try to make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, trans means, to go across. So you transcend, to go beyond yourself. All of us, in that sense, transcend if we're going to talk. And my wife says to me, when I get to being loquacious, conversation is a two-way street. It means she transcends me. She has feelings that aren't mine. And that means I have to stop and think and then try to feel and empathy. And my wife's a therapist, and she's teaching me what empathy is, trying to get inside another framework, which is what the Golden Rule is about. That's transcendence.
Yeah.
The world of nature, would you say that transcends your feeling?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
So scientists are dealing with the transcendent in the sense transcending themselves. So we're all dealing with the transcendence. The real question is, what is it that transcends us? That's the real question. Not whether there's the transcendent, but what.
What is it and what are we going to call it?
Yeah. Is there anything? The world is obviously not just my feelings. I just barely got here.
Yeah.
And apparently, from what we know, it's been here long before the species, the human species got here.
Yeah.
So that's a humbling experience. By the way, if humility is a part of religious tradition, then you would think that scientists would be very strong on humility. Because when you see how vast the cosmos is, it puts us in our place.
It does. It really does. Yeah.
And I think it's part of what the book of Job is about. You just got here.
Yeah.
Just barely. I barely got here. If my dad had not stopped off in Knoxville on his way to Pennsylvania from Florida, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
In fact, if the species were not here, the universe would have been here.
That's true. Yeah.
So in that sense, yes, there's transcendence. But whether or not they're angels and demons and goblins and ghosts and gods, that's where the debate is about.
Right.
Right. And now some people think religion is dealing with those kinds of beings. Other people say, no, that's not what religion is about.
In Genesis, it says there were giants in those days. So we have a tweet considering that.
Yeah.
Is that in the story about Noah? Is that?
No, that's
not the giants.
Yeah, no.
Okay, sorry. Okay, where are the giants then?
Well, the question is, how big do you have to be a giant? You see, and then what would lead someone to say there were giants? Did they just imagine that? Did they find bones bigger than they were, or were they talking about another species? Or I mean, who are these people talking about this, and what are they referring to, and where do they get their information? Unfortunately, the Bible doesn't give us enough information to let us know where this comes from.
Right.
So that they just assume that there were giants, and of course we all know some people are much taller than others. And I remember I went to a theology school, and we had a New Testament teacher who was short. And a church history teacher was very tall, and they were very good friends. I mean, they ran around together, and they argued and talked, and that's what good professors do. They argue and they try to. And I remember the tall history professor looked down at the New Testament and says, "Look me in the navel and say that." So from his point of view, he's looking up to.
Yeah.
And of course, if I were looking up at Will Stilk.
Right. He'd be a giant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anthropomorphism, then, you can see, in poetry often, you can see people will refer to a ship as her.
Yes.
And, you know, that's pretty anthropomorphic. And some people, I remember a friend of mine was working with his car, and he was so gentle, and he was so... And I said, "Do you want me to get you a carpet to kneel before your car?" Because it was almost a worshipful experience.
Right. Yeah.
This car. He treated it as a person, and I was teasing him. I said, "I hope you're as kind to your wife as you are to
your car."
Because he treated it as if the car had feelings.
Yeah. Oh.
Do you have? Let's see. Do we have a phone call? Let's see if we got it. Okay. Let's see what our caller has to say. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, give us a name and
I'm calling about the atheism. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Go.
Yeah, you're on.
You're on.
Okay.
Listen to the phone.
All right, sir. If atheism is true, then how do you go about explaining the whole world and how it was created?
Well, that's what astronomers and physicists and biologists and others are trying to work on, is how say just one planet alone came into being, then how Mars came into being, how Jupiter, and then how many galaxies do we have? How many galaxies do we? I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
You know, we got countless galaxies, and so we're still trying to figure out how all of these things develop.
Rhetorical question.
So, and we could say this, that in many cases we don't have very good answers to all of this. And I would say just to pronounce the word God isn't going to solve very many problems. That's almost verbal magic.
Yeah.
It still doesn't solve. Science deals not with, you know, so much who as how things developed. What's the process? And I don't think there's evidence showing that the universe is created in 6 24-hour periods. I don't think there's enough evidence to do that.
Right. Yeah.
So, unfortunately, the question is so good, and it's just so, it's almost as, how do you explain everything? I don't have a good answer, unfortunately.
In 1 minute.
But it's a sensible question, though. That's what scientists are trying to do. And we're all trying to do it with common sense, too, as best we can.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead. You had some more.
Oh, well, I was thinking we were getting kind of short on time, and I was just wondering if there was you know, a summation of this that we could make as to where religion came from.
Okay, imagine you're trying to explain things. Now, there's a story in the Bible in which David presumably sinned, and then God killed 70,000 Israelites because David sinned. Another way of explaining this is there was a plague and a lot of people were killed and they couldn't explain it, so they said, well, David must have sinned because he's a big man. And that's anthropomorphism. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. It's wrapping up things. So stay in touch with us, and thank you and goodbye.
And send us